Whenever anyone talks about the FDA Food Safety Modernization Act, they talk about 5 key provisions, including the most recently released Preventive Controls Proposal and the proposed produce safety standards. But they don't typically talk about one of the more important aspects of FSMA, and that's this part of the new law that deals with traceability. Hello, I'm Jason Huffman, Editor-in-Chief of Food Chemical News. Welcome to the Knife and Fork Show. When Congress passed and the President signed FSMA, it ordered FDA to conduct research on the ability to trace the source of various food items and make recommendations in the form of a formal report. The FDA contracted with the Institute of Food Technologists to perform this job, and in early March, IFT delivered a 334-page report that suggested a few changes in the way the agency was looking at traceability. Some 200 people ultimately contributed to this document, but 2 of the more important contributors are here with me today. Jennifer McEntire, a Senior Director at Levitt Partners, and Tejas Bhatt, the Manager of Food Safety Programs at IFT. Also with me today is Steve Clapp, Food Chemical News' Senior Editor, who writes on the subject of traceability, among other things. Steve, I thought we'd start with you. Could you tell our civilians at home who don't really pay attention to this topic very often what traceability is and why it is an important issue?
Well, let me say about a dozen years ago, I was asked to edit a new publication called Food Traceability Report, and I'll admit I was terrified because the term traceability had a certain amount of currency in Europe, but over here, they didn't like it, and they would insist on calling it product tracing. But gradually the term gained currency and caught on, and basically it's pretty simple. It's the idea that when you have a food product that you can trace it back to the people who have supplied the ingredients, and also know where those ingredients were going forward. And this has become a whole industry of technology and expertise in how you go about this, and now it's encoded in the Food Safety Modernization Act.
Okay, well, we opened the show by talking about this 334-page report, and you guys spent a little bit of time on that, just a little bit. So talk to us a little bit about what this report is, what it does, and the important purpose that it serves.
Sure. Well, FDA contracted with IFT, asked IFT to do these pilots, which were required by FSMA. So FSMA really laid out many of the guidelines and specified what needed to be done. We executed the work, and it was to conduct 2 pilots for 2 different products. We actually conducted a number of actual pilot projects collecting information, data from members of the supply chain, both on the tomato path and then a couple of different processed foods. And we looked at the information they were providing and determined, can we trace it? Can we move backwards and forwards through the supply chain, as Steve suggested? And it was not always easy. It was pretty difficult. And so we envisioned ways and we tested ways to make things better.
So the products that you guys were looking at was it tomatoes? Mm-hmm. And then there was some complex food. It was Kung Pao chicken.
Yeah, and that's as per FSMA. It was had to do a produce item, fresh produce, right, and had to do a multi-ingredient food. And Kung Pao chicken has a lot of ingredients. We also did peanut butter kind of along the way.
Peanut butter never causes any trouble, does it?
Never.
So in putting this report forward, what were some of the more important findings, do you think? Talk a little bit about maybe how we might change the mindset based on this report.
So one of the key things that IFT focused on through the pilots was we wanted to see not only how the industry can improve its product tracing practices, but really how FDA and other regulators can do a better job during an outbreak investigation and use traceability to make better decisions. So the recommendations that came out in the report, you don't have to read the 334 pages, you read the one that has the recommendations on it. It really divided nicely 50-50, 5 things that FDA can do better and 5 things that industry can do better to improve traceability as a whole.
Give me an example of 1 or 2 of those items that you thought were important that the industry could do better and that FDA could do better.
So let's talk about the industry first. what we found through the course of the pilots was that there are some critical tracking events and there are some key data elements that are standard across almost any food sector that you look at. So the data requirements for traceability are not unattainable. In fact, for the most part, they collected today for business operations. It's just not labeled as traceability data. So industry can do a better job in collecting the data that is needed for traceability and then reporting that in an electronic standardized format. They don't have to collect it electronically, it can be handwritten notes, but when they report it to the FDA, it needs to be electronic so that FDA can do a better, much more efficient job in analyzing that data. On the FDA side, maybe you can take that.
Well, and kind of to add a little bit to what you were saying, our vision is, and our recommendation is that FDA only ask for these data when they need them. So it's not, we're not envisioning a system where companies with all the food products that they're producing every day are just constantly sending these data to FDA. No, it is on that need-to-know basis when there is an active investigation going on. And we did find that companies often had a lot of these data, as Tejas said, but it's the accessibility, the ability to analyze, and that's FDA's responsibility. And they have some work, in our opinion, to do on their end to accept data. If it is available electronically today, I'm not sure that FDA has the capacity to mine these data, to see the trends, to develop the relationships between supply chain partners, to get back to that. The question we're seeking to answer is, where's the problem? Where do these paths cross when we have illnesses in different parts of the country? How do we know what the root of the problem is?
I recall Steve wrote about the report when it came out, and one of my recollections from the story was that there was an indication that we shouldn't necessarily think about, in traceability, think about foods as high risk or low risk, and we need to be able to trace all of these items, correct? It was one of the things that you guys kind of pushed forward?
Absolutely. So
not without controversy.
Right, not everyone agrees with that, but and perhaps FDA has its hands tied through what's written in FSMA, but from a practical perspective, from a pragmatic standpoint, it seems to me and to us who wrote the report that you need to have traceability regardless of what food you produce or handle or make. So,
and the evidence is there if you look back just over the past decade at the number of foods that have been implicated in outbreaks that had never been associated with illness before. So just because something is high risk now or low risk now does not mean that that's what the future holds. I say with certainty, we can expect that in the coming years we will see foods that cause outbreaks that we previously thought were low risk.
Sounds like quote of the week, Steve, doesn't it? Well, I warned you this question was coming too. When you look back over the work that was done on the report and the findings, what was the biggest surprise, do you think?
The biggest surprise for me, I guess there's been this constant battle about lot numbers. Do we have to have a lot number? And the conventional thinking was that a lot number is better, but there are a lot of challenges with tracing at that level of granularity. And we found that indeed the lot number was definitely better. But we were able to trace, especially when you're looking at a grand scale, when you're looking at tons of data, and you have the ability to analyze, to sort through those data electronically. Tejas did some wonderful work developing models based on the pilot findings, the industry members that we worked with, that showed that with not a great degree of accuracy, not as great as if you have lot numbers, but you can use other information the industry already collects, the bills of lading numbers, the purchase order numbers, and you can start to see the trends that direct you toward where the source of the problem is. And I don't know if you want to add to that.
So that would be even my biggest surprise, but I'll add one more thing to it is at the end of the day, it seems to me that the report really clearly identifies how this can be a win-win-win situation for the government, for regulators, for industry, and for consumers. So we did an incredible amount of stakeholder input. We reached out to thousands of people to get their opinions, and that's reflected in the report. So I think that's a big win, and that was unexpected when we started off. We didn't expect to have that kind of breadth.
And cooperation and consensus.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
I have one more question to ask, and we'll get through this really quickly because we're already running long. This isn't the only thing that FSMA asked for on traceability. They asked for something else. Could you guys talk a little bit about what's coming next?
You can take that.
Let me get out my crystal ball. Well, there are specifications in FSMA about what FDA does need to do, not next, but in the past. Those deadlines have passed for FDA to issue a report to Congress, which was supposed to be done last July of 2012. FDA is accepting comments on the report that we put together, and we'll use that to deliver their
Right.
final report to Congress.
Okay.
They are
Thanks
expected
for tying
to,
those two together.
They are expected to issue proposed regulations. That was supposed to be done this past winter, so that time frame is to be determined.
FDA did say that they don't expect it to come out anytime before 2014.
Right.
Okay. Something to look forward to.
Absolutely.
Well, that's it. All the time we have. Thanks to Jennifer McEntire, Tejas Bhatt, and Steve Clapp.